Okay, what I'd like to do here is to spend a few minutes talking about IPv6. And the objectives of this module are to describe hex notation and IPv6 address compression and packet structure, just the way it looks. Now that you know how to do conversion from decimal to binary, all a hex number is two 4-bit binary numbers together. Instead of going 1, 0, 1, 0, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 0, 10, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. So we have 16 different numbers that we can go 0 through 15. The other one is a configure, configure an appropriate IP addressing scheme, and then configure an IPv6 to IPv4 tunneling mechanism. So in these things, when we started out and we've looked at IPv4 address storage, and we know that it's a 32-bit number. We have the A, B, and C classful networks, the D for multicast, and the E for experimental. But those addresses were inefficiently allocated because at the front end, people didn't realize how big the internet would get, and they gave a lot of addresses to the people that did the work up front. There are universities that have Class A networks, which you remember like 16 million addresses. So those places that were at the front end have a lot of them, and we have complex routing tables, although I think that they're kind of getting that under control. What you need to set up in IPv4 is the addressing scheme so that you can supernet it and reduce the number of routing table entries, and we'll look at routing in the next module. IPv6 and IPNG is IP next generation, which is IPv6, has 128-bit address space, and with that there are 340 undecillion unique addresses. 340 undecillion is 300 trillion addresses, and we need those addresses all for the Internet of Things, and that's, I think, a Cisco that keeps talking about the Internet of Things, how many devices are actually going to be on the Internet. With that number, there are over 4,000 addresses available right now for every person on Earth, and that's a lot of addresses. The Internet of Things right now is predominantly telephones, maybe a few tablets that have public IP access, and then we're starting to grow. We've got now the thermostats that you can control over the internet, and you can close your garage door with your security system, check to be sure that the kids got home, look at the front door, all those different things. So we are going towards a system where we really are connecting everything across the internet. IPv6, very slow in transition. This thing has been in development for over a decade, and I've said earlier, I think IPv6 is the addressing scheme that's imminent. We're going to use it imminently for a long time that I can remember. So it's coming slowly. Other parts of the world who didn't get as many IPv4 addresses up front have gone to the IPv6 scheme. The other thing that has slowed the transition is the use of private IP addresses, NAT, PAT, and I keep saying those two terms. NAT is network address translation. PAT is port address translation. In a true network address translation, you have to have a one-to-one private to public IP translation. In a PAT, a port address translation, we only have to have one IP address, and we use port numbers, and we'll talk about port numbers when we get into TCP in the next meeting. But it's been in development. The other things that we've done, the NAT, PAT, and proxy servers. Proxy servers, if you recall, are the devices that we contact them, and then they go to the internet and get our information. We can have a whole bunch of users connected to a proxy server at the same time, so that we only need the one IP address for the proxy server in order to move our information to and across the network. The IPv6 packet, the header, is much simpler than the IPv4 header. We have the version, indicate the version, and it'll either be 4 or 6 in the version of the packet, and in the IPv6 packet, obviously it's going to be IPv6. The traffic class describes the packet's priority. And then we have the flow label, quality of service. Quality of service is used to add priorities to different packets, and one of the places that we really normally add a priority to is going to be IP phones, and that is one of the areas that's really sort of dictated that we do these things. The payload length indicates the length of the packet payload up to a maximum of 64K. If the payload is bigger than that, the field is 0, and a special jumbo payload option is established. Unlike IPv4, where the router figures it out, the client is supposed to figure out what the maximum size of the packet is that they can send before they start the conversation. So you actually kind of go to the other end first to see how big you can send it, and then we'll go on from there. If we have high-speed devices, we can actually go in and change the configuration of the NICs on them to allow jumbo packets, which is going to send a lot more information. That's typically done inside a network with a high-speed servers. The next header is used to describe what the next extension header is, if there is any, or where the actual payload begins. The next extension header from IP would be TCP or UDP at the transport layer. The hop limit replaces the TTL field, does the same thing, does the same function. If you look at TTL and IPv4, if you look at the TTL for a Linux machine and a TTL for a Windows machine, you're going to find that they're going to be a little bit different one to the other. The source address, the originating, the destination address, the target address, and the process of sending information from one to the other is going to be the same as we did in IPv4. It's going to look to see if it's a local address or a remote address, and then we're going to then send it to one location or another. There's other protocols in this thing. For instance, it looks for neighbors, which replaces the ARP protocol. It goes in and with the self-assigned with the local link local address, finds out who its neighbors are. This is a comparison of the two headers, and down here we have the fields name kept from IPv4 to IPv6. So we have some of these things have stayed the same. When we look in here, the version, we have the version fields the same. One's going to say 4 and one's going to say 6, obviously. The source address and the destination address names are changed, but the number of bits, the size of it, 128 bits over here, 32 bits in the other one. The ones in blue are ones that the name and position changed in IPv6, so that still does the same thing. And then we have a new field here at flow label in IPv6, which is going to be our quality of service, so that we can control what goes on in the system. Octal and hexadecimal. The book talks about octals not really used very much and octals not really used very much, but we have in our numbering systems that we use is base 10 is what we use, but then it goes to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then we go to 0, but we add a 1 to the next place. So when we have like $13, we have 1 10 and 3 1s, so that would be a 1 and a 3. Base 2 binary we've looked at, it's a 0 or a 1, and it's used for the powers of 2, and that's kind of handy because all we have to do is be able to multiply by 2. Base 8 octal, and it's powers of 8, which makes it a little bit more difficult to use. Octal can have leading zeros, and that's how you might see what it looks like. So we have a leading 0. This is going to be an octal number. Hexadecimal is going to have an X in it. 0 XFF tells us that this is going to be a hex number. So the 0x tells us it's hex in those. One hex digit, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, is a 4-bit, messed that up then, a 4-bit binary number, and it's called a nibble. And back when I was first learning this thing, since a byte is 8 bits, which is 2 of these things, we would say there's 2 nibbles in a byte. 2 hex digits represent 1 octet or a byte, 8 bits, like we've been dealing with IPv4 addressing, 4 octets in that one. 4 hex digits represents a double byte, 16 bits, and that's what IPv6 addressing uses. To convert hex to decimal, the easiest thing is to break it up into 2 4-bit numbers. If I have 1111, that's 15, and 15 and 15 would be FF. When we look at let me bring in a little chart here. We look at the binary to decimal conversion. 0 is all zeros. I mean, it's the same thing. The 1, 2, 4, 8, 1, 2, 4, 8. The same chart that we used. This one would be 8 here, obviously. The same chart that we used when we were doing binary to decimal conversions. And what this does is we just have 2 of these would be FF would take care of 8 bits, and if we did 2 more bits would be the 16, the double, and then we're going to have a colon, and then we're going to have some more until we get the full 128-bit address that we use for IPv6. 128-bit address looks something like this, and boy, that's a whole bunch of typing if you wrote the whole thing in binary, but that's what the 128 total bits would be. To simplify it, we use hex notation, and each hex digit represents 4 of the binary bits. So if we go up here, each of these would represent, well, each of the hex. This would be a hex number and another hex number, and when we put them in 4s, we would use the first 4 here for the first digit, and then they'll have a colon, and then we'll go to the next 4 and a colon, and so on until we write the thing in binary. The hex digits are arranged in 8 by 16 the double byte blocks separated by colons, 2001, and this is what an address is going to look like. We're going to have specific headers, and the 2001 here is going to represent some specific. We're going to look at a table in a minute. The compression makes it a little bit handier because we can represent a string of zeros, all zeros, with a double colon one time. You can only have this one time in the system. If we had, get back to it, if we had another set of double zeros, which we do here, we then would not be able to represent it again with the colon, but what we do is we can remove the leading zeros, omit the leading zeros, and with all those leading zeros that just leaves a 0. And the reason that you can only have one is so that it it can determine how long the address is. And the ABC here is another one that has dropped the leading 0. What I have typically seen on the tests that I've taken about IPv6, they may want you to know some addresses, and we'll get to what the loopback is in a minute. It's the only simple thing I think in IPv6::1. But they want you to be able to recognize what some of the headers are, as well as what a valid IPv6 address looks like. So in the rules, the leading 0s are suppressed. The inline 0s can be replaced by a : one time. A : once, which we do. We have the first : here, CD00: 211. I mean, and this one is a whole bunch of zeros, so we can really shorten the address if there are a string of zeros in here. And then the 211E and the 729C. If we had a 0, 111, that's easy to write, we could drop that leading 0 also. And the system understands that. It understands what the length is supposed to be. The loopback address, and again, if we use the : to replace the string of zeros, we have the : and then we drop the leading zeros, it's going to be a : 1. If we just have a : that is the unknown IP address, which is like the 0.0.0 in IPv4, where we're trying to find something, but we don't have an IP address yet. If you use IPv6 for a URL, you've got to put it in square brackets to get to the IP address. The IP host bits are fixed, and when we say fixed, we have a network ID is going to be 64 bits. We have a 5050 here, and then the interface ID is going to be 64 bits. The interface identifier is always the last 64 bits. The identifier, the thing that's going to make it unique. And the first 64 bits are used for address, and sometimes we use the first 48 for the network ID and the next 16 for the subnet. And then the host is going to be 64 bits. And the addressing scheme are a little different than IPv4. There is no broadcast in this one. It's a multicast. And we have Unicast, which we had a 1-to-1. We looked at that. A 1-to-1 is going to be a Unicast, one device to the other, one host to the other. A multicast is a subscription service, and unlike IPv4, where multicast was actually an option, it is not an option in IPv6. It must be supported, and again, there are no broadcasts. The Unicast means that we can send information to some of the multicast members. We don't have to send it to everything. Unicast typically is being sent to the one that's closest, and that's used a lot of times for routing protocols, for those guys to communicate with each other. We have, in the system, we have global and link local. Link local is like the a PIPA address. It's not going to be routable, and it's going to be identified by an FE0 in the prefix. So a 10-bit prefix here is going to translate to FE. It's not routable. It is used to communicate on the same network subnet with its neighbors, and you'll find a list of neighbors in IPv6 protocol. If you have a Windows machine, and I think also a Linux machine, the new ones, and Windows, I think ever since XP, has supported IPv6. It wasn't installed automatically until 7. 7, 8, and 10 automatically put IPv6 in and assign itself a link local address. It Windows then uses some of the efficiencies of IPv6 even if you're using IPv4. And what I've found is if I ping a neighbor name, a local host name, a machine on my local network, it actually does the ping and it does the communication in IPv6, so it goes out and finds these guys. And all interfaces have a linked local address. When it gets this address, it actually checks to be sure that it is unique, and if it's not, I'll go back and reassign it, because just like in IPv4 we said that addresses have to be unique, they have to be unique in IPv6 also, which kind of makes sense. A global address is 001 binary, can be so that the prefix will be a 2 or a 3 in hex. We have a 3-bit here, and then the global prefix network ID is going to be the next 45 bits, and the subnet will be the next 16 bits. The global allows the hierarchical arrangement of IPv6. They've done a little bit better job of trying to minimize the size of route tables. Hierarchical global, based on the global routing prefix, is different blocks of addresses are assigned logically to different parts of the world. So we have this thing 45 bits allocated to the registries, and these are regional registries, or in the North America, in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, so that these addresses are allocated in that way. The following 16 bits for subnetting, and when we start using IPv6, instead of having the one IP address that we have now in IPv4, and we use PAT on our home routers, we'll have a whole bunch of addresses to be assigned within our network. There is no NAT in IPv6. All the addresses are public addresses, which causes some concern for some security people, because one of the things that PAT and NAT allow is to disguise or hide the internal IP addressing structure, which slows down people trying to hack the network a little bit. We can have an EUI64 address, and we can derive it. It's derived from the MAC address. So if we have this MAC address, we flip the UL bit here and we get a 02 from it, and then the first half of the MAC address, actually the first half, flip it and do the first half of the MAC address, and then put an FFFE in the middle, followed by the second half of the MAC address, and we get the number of bits that we need in order to have a self-constructed IPv6 address. Other addressing schemes, a multicast is not optional. We said that earlier. The 8-bit multicast scope, or FF in hex, we have a 4-bit flag, a 4-bit scope, link local or global, and then 112-bit group ID for the multicast. Link local multicasts replace the broadcast. There are no broadcasts in IPv6. And the Unicast can send to any member of the group and is typically sent to the one that's closest. And the principal use for the Unicast is for routing protocols. The unspecified, the old 0.0.0.0 address in IPv4 is replaced by the : address. And the loopback, the 127.0.0.1, is replaced by the : 1 address. Some of the prefixes and things that they may want you to know, some of a global unicast prefix is going to be 2000. The link local we looked at is going to be FE. The leading hex characters, the 2000 will be 2 or 3. FE80. The ULA unicast FD00, multicast FF for the leading hex characters, multicast local FF02, solicited, and this table is in the book, so you can take a look at it. I think that the ones that probably or most likely the ones that are big deal would be the global unicast, the link local unicast, and the multicast, because those are the things that are going to be used most often. Stateless address auto configuration is when we generate our own unique address, and we do that link local address, and all of them have a link local address, and then the routers are going to tell us what the network is, what network we're on. And once we know the network, we can use the link local address and the network address, and I think there's an exercise to do that in the lab. We can give ourselves an IPv6 address that would be able to get off of our local network. The link local addresses are only valid on the local network, and it replaces the APIPA. If I can't do that, can I? Still can't write with a mouse. Neighborhood Discovery Protocol replaces ARP. ARP is gone. ARP is a kind of a dangerous protocol because it'll accept the answer to the question that it never asked, like what's the address, the MAC address of the default gateway. And the way a man-in-the-middle attack, at least some of the man-in-the-middle attacks work, is you start a system up in a layer 2 or in a network, and then you start sending out ARP broadcasting ARP replies to everybody, telling all of the workstations that your MAC address is the default gateway. So all the traffic is sent through you, where you can look at the traffic as it goes through and try to get information, credentials, any sort of thing that you want to do from that. And ARP, it's a simple protocol. It's a dangerous protocol because it does allow the man-in-the-middle attacks. That can be used on a network that's sometimes used within the open networks that you go to at the Starbucks or the grocery store or wherever else. You could sit in there with a man-in-the-middle attack and have an in and an out where you've filtered or forced all the traffic through you, and you can monitor things, you can watch things. If you want to play with this sometime, go get Cain and Abel off of the internet and set up your own little man-in-the-middle attack. It's not the most efficient one, but it demonstrates what goes on there. The multicast listener discovery protocol replaces IGMP, and remember that was the one that grouped multicast together. ICMPv6 and DHCPv6 are still there. We have DHCP, and we can have DHCP servers, but they're not necessary all the time because these two mechanisms can give us an address. But IPv6 is still available to assign those addresses. Dual stack systems. ISATAP is intrasite automatic tunneling address protocol. What a mouthful. What dual stack means is we have both 4 and 6 running, and if we have to use only one of them, we can do that. We can have IPv4 mapped addresses, going to be : F and then : whatever the IPv4 IP address is going to be. Tunneling, what a 6-to-4 allows us to do, if we have a 6 network, then we can tunnel the 4 traffic through it. What we do is take the IPv6 packet and encapsulate it in an IPv4 to send it from one location to the other. And once it gets to the other end, it strips out the IPv6 so that the IPv6 packet is delivered over a system that doesn't support 6 in route. Teredo by Windows uses, this is implemented by Teredo, Windows uses it, and Migrating uses it in Linux. 4 to 6 tunneling, where we tunnel 4 over 6, not really widely adopted because 4, we have 4 going across all of our networks. So with that, the review is describe the hex notation, and hopefully you can do that by now, and the IPv6 address compression and the packet structure of what an IPv6 address looks like. On IPv6, configure an appropriate IPv6 addressing scheme, and that is what kind of prefixes do we need in that, and configure a 6 to 4 tunneling mechanism. And with that, Lab 8 for the IPv6 addressing is the one that should be done in conjunction with this lecture.